Hey everyone, this is Metalhead Nation 1021. I'm trying to get on a better schedule about posting videos, and there's been a lot of news to come out lately, especially within the progressive rock and metal community, and a lot of big releases this year that are either supposed to be coming out or have been confirmed to be coming out this year. One of the biggest ones, and one of the longest waits that the fan base has had, would definitely be the band Liquid Tension Experiment. For those of you who aren't familiar, and I believe it was 1997, uh, two members of Dream Theater, as well as two other musicians, came together, and both of those other musicians from quite popular progressive rock or otherwise rock groups came together and decided to write an album as a supergroup. This ended up becoming Liquid Tension Experiment 1, which was released in 1998. Afterwards, which would have been in the latter half of 98, they reconvened and they decided to write a second album. And this one is Liquid Tension Experiment 2, which came out in 1999. At this point, one of the two members that wasn't a member of Dream Theater was asked to join the band, that being Jordan Rudess. And ever since then, the rest is history. And he's been their keyboardist for 21 years now, 22 technically. Anyways, the band sort of dissolved after that, and since then we haven't really gotten a new Liquid Tension Experiment album, and for the most part the band didn't see a point because three of the members are already in the main band, I guess you could call it, the main project, which is Dream Theater. What's the point of continuing this project? We'd basically be a Dream Theater clone in their eyes. Fast forward to 2010, Mike Portnoy leaves the band, and people continue to this day, sort of pine for new music between the so-called classic Dream Theater lineup in many people's eyes, like the main three being John, Jordan, and Portnoy. So things weren't looking good for a while for a reunion of any kind between any of the members. With Mike, of course, since he's left the band. Luckily for people who were hoping for a reunion, they got a semi-reunion last year with the release of John's solo album, Terminal Velocity, which featured Portnoy on drums. The album being an amazing album and all, it still felt a little incomplete as it was still lacking another key component of the Dream Theater sound, which is keyboard. There had been a few hints dropped over the course of the last 10 or 11 years since Portnoy left that they've wanted to maybe get back together, possibly. Time is difficult to organize, especially with touring and whatnot. Well, a few specific hints, particularly one that Jordan dropped on a cameo video that he did, sort of leaned in the direction that they may have made a little more progress on this project than we initially believed. And December of last year, out of nowhere, they basically released the news of the century, or well, so far since it has been since the 1990s since they released the last piece of music together. Literally has been the difference of a century in a way. That they were finally going to release a third album, the long-awaited third album. They did have Liquid Trio that came out in 2008, I believe, which was recordings from the LTE2 sessions when John had to leave because his wife was giving birth. Not really nearly in the spirit of Liquid Tension Experiment, in my opinion. Still a great album nonetheless. I think it's all improv jams and whatnot. And it's still really good, but definitely doesn't hold a candle to the Liquid Tension Experiment albums. So, with all that history out of the way, for people who aren't familiar, the third one, yes, is now coming out. Has been confirmed to be released on March 26th, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And in the spirit of this wonderful news, after 22 years of waiting, I decided to do a video basically a comparison or a versus between Liquid Tension Experiment 1 and 2. At this point, I'm going to be putting my glasses on so I can actually read these albums. I would just want to make sure I get the information right and don't mispronounce anything. I've listened to each of these albums multiple times over the past few months, and I feel like I have a pretty good idea of each one and how I feel about it. I don't see my opinions changing drastically. So anyways, the point of this video is a which of these two is better leading up to the new album. This is a pretty easy comparison to do. Both are almost the exact same length, and both came out around the same time. And they sound pretty similar for the most part with a few key differences. And one thing I want to say is that though the Liquid Trio Experiment album, I think it's called Spontaneous Combustion, is technically an LTE 2 session, I'm not going to be including it in like those tracks in this comparison, just because they weren't released until 10 years later. So without further ado, Liquid Tension Experiment 1 versus Liquid Tension Experiment 2. I'm basically going to go through the details of each one, the songs, the key moments, I should say, and once I do that, I'm just going to come to a conclusion on which one I believe is the better album. If I had to recommend one of these for somebody to listen to before the new album came out, which one would I choose? Personally, and I should say this, I shouldn't have to say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. This is my personal opinion. This isn't a definitive list or a definitive comparison. If you yourself have a different opinion, I'd like to hear it in the comments, and I want to hear why, because maybe it'll turn my own mind or my own ears onto something I wasn't hearing originally, and it could even switch the outcome of which one I actually do believe is the better album. So anyways, starting with Liquid Tension Experiment 1, came out in 1998. Both of these albums have the same lineup, by the way, with Tony Levin, John Petrucci, Jordan Rudess, and Mike Portnoy. This was the first time, other than a few live shows, we'd ever heard a collaboration between Dream Theater and Jordan Rudess. This was before he was in the band, and so was the second album, by the way. The first notes that we get to hear from this now very famous combination of Jordan, John, and Mike are some of the most blisteringly fast on the entire album. It opens with Paradigm Shift, if I'm not mistaken, that's how it's pronounced. About a 9-minute long track, and they're all instrumental. This track is probably their second most popular, first arguably, and probably has the most memorable intro of any Liquid Tension Experiment song. It lets you know right off the bat this is a technical album, and if you're not into a lot of the shreddy guitars or keyboards or fast and crazy for the sake of fast and crazy, this probably isn't the band for you. There are a few exceptions that I might get into later and point out specifically. It's a long, fast song. Has, in my opinion, the most memorable riff of the band. After that intro shred session, they go into I'd consider it the main riff. And it's powerful. And this is the first time you're hearing the collaboration of these three artists, and plus Tony, who's also an integral part of the sound, together. And it's really cool that they open the album with a track that you wonder at the end, how can they top this? Yet I believe later on the album they do. And I should also distinguish now that this is a studio track on the album. There were also, like, the albums are more, so I guess, half improvisational jam in the studio and half pre-written material or material written in the studio and then recorded. So I'll try to point out when I can, or when I believe it's an important piece of information, which ones are and which ones aren't improved. So anyways, yeah, Paradigm Shift is an amazing intro to the album. And this tradition has continued to the second album, and in a lot of theories I've heard for the third one, where the trailer music came from, the trailer that came out late last year. A lot of people believe it is the intro track that I've seen. So it's probably another tradition that they're going to be carrying on this next album, which is awesome. But next one is Osmosis, which is a bit shorter. I believe it's an improv jam. I'm not entirely sure, but it's tonally completely different. So it's a 180 from Paradigm Shift. It's a lot softer, and I wouldn't say it's like ballady at all, but it's slow. It's kind of funky, and it's nice. It is a shorter one as well. Kindred Spirits is another one that's really well done. It's a bit longer. I don't think it's a standout in my opinion, but some people might disagree with me on that. The Stretch is another short one. Another one, it's not very memorable for me. I know what it is. I know what it sounds like when I hear it, but it's not one that when I think Liquid Tension Experiment, it instantly comes to mind. It's the shortest song on the album. Freedom of Speech is probably the third most popular Liquid Tension Experiment track. It is 9 minutes long and has an awesome intro to it as well. And very much like Paradigm Shift, the intro it starts with very solo-y guitar, not to the extent of Paradigm Shift, I'd say, where it's just going absolutely insane. But this one also has some awesome moments, like towards the end of the song. I don't remember the name of the song. I believe that it's not an original piece. I'm almost positive. They sort of tie that into the end and then go into like the circus music. It's just fun. It shows the fun spirit of the band, and it also shows the wonderful songwriting and the complexity that they put behind these songs. And so I very much like that track. It's probably my second, or that and Paradigm Shift are probably tied for second or third place, like one above the other. It changes day to day. Then there's Chris and Kevin's Excellent Adventure. I believe it had the title had something to do with the studio engineers or something. I'm not entirely sure, but very, very. It's another short one, and I'm not sure if it's improvised or not, but it's another one. I feel like the shorter songs on this album don't really grab your attention the same way that the longer ones do, and they're meant almost as breathers between the very complex, meaty tracks on the albums. I'm sorry. No, there's State of Grace, which comes afterwards. That is probably the most ballady type track. It's very I guess the closest comparison I can draw is like the Spirit Carries On, the guitar, where it's very smooth and just beautiful. Very much a slower paced song, but a much more memorable one in my opinion than a lot of the other songs that are a bit slower on this album. And it's semi-short. It's about 5 minutes, but I think it's really, really well done. Something I just realized is I accidentally confused Universal Mind's intro with Freedom of Speeches. I'm sorry about that, and also the ending as well. I got them mixed up in my head. I was talking about this real fast, Universal Mind. That's the one I meant to say is probably the second most popular track. Or, I'm sorry, third most popular track by the band behind Acid Rain and Paradigm Shift. Again, I already touched on this. Freedom of Speech, I'll go back and I'll describe that one. Not as memorable as the other longer songs, for the most part. So little so that I accidentally confused it with the more memorable song. And yeah, I'm sorry, it's probably a tie between Universal Mind and Paradigm Shift. That is my second and third favorites on the album. So I'm sorry about that, but I guess I'll establish that now as like a weakness of this album. But not a huge one. You kind of enjoy it in the moment more than you do retrospectively. That is not the case for what is the final track, technically final 5 tracks on the album, 3 Minute Warning, which is completely improvised in the studio. It is a 28-minute masterpiece and behemoth of improvisational skill between all four of these musicians. It is seamless, and for the longest time, until I really looked into the history of the band, I didn't even know that it was an improvised track. I actually believed that it was something pre-written, or at least most of it was. And on your first listen, if you're not a seasoned listener of the band, you probably won't be able to tell either, because it is so insanely well done. And there's a reason they kept this and put it on the album. It's because it almost seems like a pre-written song, something that would take most musicians hours, days, maybe even weeks to write. The band was able to come up with on the fly. I think this is the biggest strength of the album, is this track. This is my favorite track off of the first album. And uh, if you don't want to listen to the whole 28 minutes, on the CD release, sadly on the digital release, they separate it into 5 separate tracks, parts 1 through 5. And everything on that track is just absolutely perfectly done. The guitar, especially, I should say. The keyboard has its moments a lot on this song, and so does the bass, and the drums as well. But I really feel like the guitar is what shines the most on this song. So many crazy passages by Petrucci. Towards the end, especially, there's some crazy sweep picking sections. It's just everything about this song is perfect in my opinion. Probably, if you really want to get the experience of the band like it's meant to be heard, or what the project's main goal was, which was to have amazing musicianship combined with a lot of fun music that you can just listen to and not be tied upon with lyrics or things like that. Just enjoy it in the moment. That is the perfect track. And on top of that, it's just a very memorable song as well. It's an amazing song. And I wouldn't trade it for anything else on the album. I wouldn't trade it for more studio tracks or anything, because honestly, I think that song is really better than some of the studio written tracks on this album. And again, that was just come up with in the same exact length that the song is, because it was like right off the cuff, on the fly. They completely just sat down and said, we're going to record a jam, and this is what came out of it. It's a beautiful song, and it follows a very unconventional song structure, obviously, because it is a jam. But it is, in my opinion, the most enjoyable track on the album. So if you're willing to take 28 minutes out of your life to listen to a true improvisational / jam type masterpiece, that is the song I'll recommend, 100%. So those are all 8 tracks on Liquid Tension Experiment 1. I'm sorry, all 9 tracks. And all I can say about that is it is an experience that you really have to sit down and be willing to listen to the whole thing, and you will be rewarded, very much so. That same thing can be said about their second album, Liquid Tension Experiment 2. Released a year later, 1999, before Scenes from a Memory, though. This was before Rudess joined Dream Theater, and this album is generally, I'd say, and depending on what circle of music or like group you're in, if you're in the progressive rock group, this one's generally considered the better album. If you're in the metal group, it's generally the first one. But it's not that big of a divide. You're gonna get enjoyment either way. If you enjoy one, you're definitely gonna enjoy the other. I would consider myself somebody who straddles that line almost 50-50. So I find that I'm probably a decent enough judge for this. But anyways, this album starts off with one of the strongest tracks the band has ever done. And funny enough, it was only written within the course of about 2 hours, if I'm not mistaken. And it is by far the band's most popular track. The live version of this track has over 5 or 6 million views on YouTube at this point. It's Acid Rain. That intro riff with the hi-hat and the guitar, it's just, yeah, instantly recognizable. And again, their tendency to start off their albums with an absolute banger is very evident here. And again, this is probably their most popular track. And if you're at all into Dream Theater, or I guess instrumental progressive rock or metal at all, you've probably heard this and or Paradigm Shift at one point or another. By Accident is the next track. I'd say that this one is I believe this one was written actually as a trio while they were in the studio because I believe one of the members had to go to the hospital for a headache or something like that. So it's a little more disjointed in my opinion. You can tell a little bit that it was written in separate. I don't know the best way to put it. It was written with only part of the band present and one of the most integral songwriters of the band not being there. It still works in my opinion. If I'm not mistaken, the next one, 914, is a jam that they did while John was out because of his wife giving birth. I might be mistaken on that, but I'm not entirely sure. This one is just not memorable for me. I'm sorry. Uh, just no, not as memorable for me. It sort of falls within the scope of the ones off of the first album that were shorter, and this is the shortest track on the second album. Another Dimension, if I'm remembering this one correctly, it's just very dreamy. It's a very well done track. This album I tend to find is less memorable for me. So I'm having a harder time going through these without confusing stuff. Again, it's something you listen to in the moment, though. It's a very strong track. It's another one I think has become a live staple, along with another one I'll be touching on later. The magnum opus of this album's, you could say, 3-minute warning, is When the Water Breaks, which is aptly titled after the incident with John having to leave the sessions due to his wife giving birth. It's the longest song on the album at 17 minutes. It is arguably the most complex song on the entire album, and arguably their most complex song they've ever written. It can be said. It is the most, I'd say, most Dream Theater-like song they've ever done in terms of the sound. This was almost the precursor to Jordan joining the band. It sounds like something that could have shown up on Metropolis Part 2, or at least sections of it does. It is just an extremely strong song. I would say that this is probably, in my opinion, their second best track. I would still put 3-minute warning above it just because of the circumstance of that being a jam and still turning out so amazing, as well as the extra 11 minutes of runtime isn't wasted on 3-minute warning. It is equally as good as the rest of it. So I still find that 3-minute warning is the stronger track, but this one is the magnum opus of this album. I would argue, however, that this album may be a bit more balanced in a way, where and well structured, I should say. So that's the longest song. Then it moves on to the second longest song, which is Chewbacca. That one is more of a, if I'm not mistaken, it's completely improvised as well. And when you listen to jams from their 2008 tour when they did LA and Chicago, maybe not, Chicago's not a good example, LA and New York, they sound very similar to this. You can tell that the chemistry on Chewbacca in particular is very, very telling of their pure and raw chemistry, even when live. This is the most reminiscent of that style. Liquid Dreams is another one. This is the third longest, about 10 minutes. I am also, I wouldn't say drawing a blank, but it's another one that isn't as memorable for me, sadly. But I believe it's also another one that they do play live quite often. I can't remember if it's improvised or not, or half improvised. But I'd say it's not nearly as strong as the songs on the first half. And then Hourglass is another short song, which I feel falls into the same sort of tropes as the other one. I believe it's better than 914 in my opinion. It's almost the same length, just a little bit longer. But another one where I don't see myself coming back to that song a lot. And I definitely would not have made it the album closer. I just feel like it's significantly weaker closing an album than 3 Minute Warning is for the first album, and I feel like if they weren't going to use like a mega jam to finish the album off, they could have at least maybe written a studio track to end the album off, or maybe shifted the structure of the album. I mean, not like in my opinion, I think that When the Water Breaks would have been an awesome album closer. They decided not to do that though, so whatever. Uh, that's the last track. This is an 8-track album. Once again, it's about the same length. It is about the same length as the first album is. However, on average, the songs are longer on this album. As for the first album, only one track is above 10 minutes. I mean, it's 28 minutes. For the second album, however, the longest track, there are 3 tracks that exceed the 10-minute mark, and one that is this close to. There are less tracks on this album, and there's no 28-minute epic on it. So, with that information out, it's basically, in terms for people that are more concerned with the structure, between the two, I'd say that the second album has a better structure in terms of like conventional structure. It's more balanced in terms of song lengths. It doesn't have as many of those short pieces that are generally less interesting, in my opinion. However, I'd say that the first album arguably has stronger moments, at least in my opinion. When it hits hard. And the second album has those moments too, but I don't think to the same degree that the first one does. Again, this is personal opinion. So between these two, or for the first one, I say that again, the positives are, it has that the biggest positive is that it has the 28-minute epic at the end, which does it so many favors. Some people might not like that, but in my opinion, it's just the perfect Liquid Tension Experiment track. It also contains, I'd say slightly more memorable songs than the second one does. Again, this one has Paradigm Shift and Universal Mind on it, and arguably Freedom of Speech for some people. And then State of Grace is another one that's very memorable. And then the second album has When the Water Breaks and Acid Rain, which are both memorable. That's a bit less than the first one. So I'd say it depends. The weaknesses of the first one would be that the shorter tracks just don't hit as well as a lot of the longer pieces, and like one of the longer tracks on the album, which is Freedom of Speech, is just not one that connects as well, in my opinion, as the other longer pieces, like Paradigm Shift and Universal Mind are about the same length, yet they sort of have a much stronger impact. But it's a very small gripe on this album, and it's not a bad song by any means. It's just not nearly as memorable. So that's with the first album. The second album, The Strengths, it basically has their most memorable song for a lot of people, and probably including myself, with Acid Rain. It also leans more diversely on the improvisational jams and a lot of different soundscapes, which I find very interesting. I think this is why this one in particular is more accepted by progressive rock fans, as a lot of the jams on this album are they're spread out across the album, and since they're not interconnected like 3 Minute Warning is, a lot of them are very diverse. So I definitely understand that. Also, another strength is that the song lengths are a bit longer, and this is a strength in my opinion, which gives them a little more time to move around within a singular piece of music. And finally, I mean, when the water breaks is again, it's probably its biggest strength. Another track, like instead of relying on a jam a second time to be the longest track on the album, they decided to sit down and write a very compelling instrumental epic, which is hard to do because you're obviously going to be running through a lot of different ideas between the four members. It's almost easier to jam an epic instrumentally when you have this much musical talent compared to write one. But I'd say they did an amazing job. The weaknesses, I find that this album is significantly more forgettable for the most part than the first one is, and this one sounds a lot less like what Dream Theater would become once Rudis joined. There's a lot more improvisation. So, I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for the Dream Theater sound but instrumental, the first album all the way. If you're looking for a whole new take on the sounds of each of the members of the band and of the other projects as well, the second one, 100%. Other than When the Water Breaks, this one does not sound very much like what Dream Theater would end up putting out during the Portnoy, Rudis, Petrucci era. So between those two, this one is the less Dream Theater-esque, which might play into my conclusion. Hint. Anyways, those are the strengths and weaknesses of both of the albums. So finally, the conclusion. Which one do I prefer? Again, both amazing albums, nearly flawless, or as flawless as you can make an album that's written within like the course of a week or two, and still both are cornerstones of and foundational blocks for both instrumental progressive metal as well as technical music or technical metal as a whole over the next 20 years after their release, up until now even. But between these two, I'm gonna have to go with the first one, 100%. And that may just be because Dream Theater is my favorite band, but I full-heartedly believe that this album right here is stronger than even some of the work that Dream Theater has put out, both during the Portnoy era and since. I think this is an album that was recorded in such little time. I believe it was a week for this one, like right on the cusp of a week. It is so insanely strong. I have no words when I listen to this album. This is the one I always jump to when I'm trying to show a friend the band, and I believe it's significantly more trying to think of the right word to say. It's more balanced in a way. Not in the point of the structure, but the music throughout it. It starts good, it ends good. The middle is great. It's just everything. It's just great. It's like it's all up here. There's like the dips are tiny, and it just continues to stay significantly great throughout its entire runtime, which the second album is pretty close to doing, but I just cannot give it that credit due to a lot of it being far more forgettable. So, to conclude this video, I'd like to say once again that I would say that this is the better album of the two. If you disagree with me, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Also, I would like to talk a little bit about the new album. From what I've gathered, it looks like the first disc, I should say, as it is a double album technically, is all studio material. I might be wrong, but that's what it looks like. They're all studio tracks that were, and by that I mean ones that were written by the band and not jammed out or improvised, and then like improvised and recorded. That's about an hour of music right there, and they're even for people who have been following the band or people who know a little bit more of the history, they're even covering the song Rhapsody in Blue, which is a cover. I believe the song came out in like 1917 or something like that. It's quite an old song, and they actually covered the song originally back in 2008 during their live shows. So to see it finally get a studio release in good quality is going to be amazing. And so, with the exception of that, the rest of it is original material, and I believe all pre-written. There is also a bonus disc, which is they haven't released much information on, but is said to have an hour or so of jams on it. I don't know if that means like little snippets or like full-on jam tracks, to the extent of ones found on the first two Liquid Tension Experiment albums or on Liquid Trio Experiment. So I'm hoping for the latter. I'd like to see some more of the jam songs, and I think it'd divide the album up really well, and it also give people who like a particular side of the band an option to choose which one they want to listen to and when. Like the improvisational jam sections or the studio more dense and meticulously crafted songs. It gives them that choice between those two extremes. So if this really does live up to the hype, hopefully it is their best album. And once it does come out, I'm most definitely going to do a review on it. And I'm excited. It's less than 2 months away. Actually, no, it's actually more than 2 months away, which kind of is disappointing. But it'll be worth the wait. We've waited 22 years already. What are a few more months to that? So, anyways, thank you for watching. I highly doubt anybody got this far, and this went a lot longer than I thought it would. I kind of ranted about a few things. It was like especially 3-minute warning. I'm just that passionate about that song. But anyways, I'll probably be doing a review of some sort or talking about the new Transatlantic album coming out. And I plan on also talking about Liquid Tension Experiment album when it comes out. I may try to do a video on something else, maybe like an album collection update again. But if you got this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I'm going to try to increase the quality of these videos in the future. I realize the audio and the video is not that great. So, yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for tolerating my rambling and the terrible video and sound quality. And again, just tell me what you guys think about these two albums and what you think about the new Liquid Tension Experiment album coming out. And anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you hopefully in the next video. And thank you for sticking around to the end.